So one thing about this passage actually, and once you go through these answer choices, did anyone know a recurring theme that we just finished talking about? It's a decisive factor in a lot of these answer choices.
If it repeats part of the argument.
Oh.
Not if it repeats part of the argument. Relative versus
Oh.
absolute. So was the original passage, was it relative or absolute?
Relative.
Everything in it was relative, right? The greater the number of people, the greater the number whose health is potentially at risk. That's relative. It doesn't say that there's a lot of people, it just says more, right? Then the next sentence says, more people regularly use these products than prescription drugs. That's also relative. Okay, it's just a greater number than that. Therefore, it is even more important, right? Now, passages don't have to be this way. They don't have to be all relative, but every sentence in this passage was relative. Now, which one following principles, if valid, most helps to justify the conclusion in above? The conclusion introduces what new idea?
About like more important versus
Safety.
Both of those.
Yeah.
More important and testing for safety and stuff like that. I mean, they do talk about health being potentially at risk, so that's kind of connected to safety, maybe, but more important comes out of nowhere, right? Like, you have to make a value judgment that is therefore more important because it affects more people. Is something more important just because it affects more people? No, it could also, something could affect more people, but be less important for what reason?
It's less deadly.
So it's deadly? Yeah, like, I don't know, smog affects everybody, but it's not as important as, I don't know, radiation or something like that, right? Okay, so answer choice A, what's the first clue that it is wrong?
whether or not.
That it depends mainly
I think
On the
it is
number of
important.
people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so whether or not it is important for a given product to be carefully tested depends mainly on the number of people who regularly use that product. That actually goes after, that helps one of the assumptions that we were just talking about, right? Like, does it really depend on the number of people, or does it depend on the severity of the thing? So I think this helps the argument, but by using the phrase important, right? This is not about it being more important, it's just saying it's important. Okay, so it's important. Both of these things could be important because maybe they both affect a lot of people, but we need to know that it is more important to help or to study or to put resources toward the household cleaning products.
Can I talk this out for a sec?
Sure, go for it.
So like the conclusion is about, like the subject of the conclusion is about importance.
Yeah, it's more important.
Right, it's more important.
Yeah.
So how could you say that an answer that begins with whether or not it is important when the conclusion establishes a position on importance is a correct answer?
Well, because we're looking for the answer that most strengthens the argument. And so by at least on some level addressing that potential assumption, right, that the number of people is important versus the number, how severe the issue or how severe the risk is.
But I feel like whether or not is like an apathetic tone to take with the importance.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a very strong answer,
Yeah.
but it still is like, hey, the importance depends on the number of people, mainly, right? So I would keep this open, but unfortunately, especially as we get into the other answers, this word important kind of kills it because it's like, oh, a whole bunch of things could be important, but it doesn't tell you the relative importance.
Yeah, that's, yeah. It's saying like, even though the passage is like, this is more important than this, and this is more important than this, you don't know that at the end of the day anything's actually important. Versus the answer is saying like.
Or they could all be important, right? Like, we're like, oh, great, they're all important, but is that
Yeah.
one more important than the other one?
Okay, got it.
So B, what makes this wrong? It is very important for any product that is regularly used by a large number of people to be carefully tested and ensure its safety.
Large number of people.
Both problems, right? We have very important. Okay, does that make it more important than something else? We don't know. They could both be very important. Also, by saying a large number of people, both of these could be large or both of these groups could be small. All we know is that household cleaning products has more people using it than prescription medicine, right? So answer choice A fails the relative to absolute conversion because it switches between the two. Answer choice B fails that as well. right? So like these are definitively wrong. You just can't use them. Are we okay with this? Okay. Sarah, how do you feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, I like it, I guess it makes sense, but when I'm looking at a question like this, I don't think about any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I just choose what seems right.
Yeah.
And I know that's a bad strategy, but I just like, it just seems like a lot of effort to be putting into this question. Like reading it this carefully, I get that it leads you to the right answer. But is it necessary?
No, it's not necessarily necessary. It just depends on what happens when you get to two answers and you're debating between them.
Right.
And you don't know how to distinguish between the two, right? They both sound right.
Yeah.
So I would definitely rely on your intuition most of the time, especially if you can see. Well, so why did you get rid of B? Do you remember?
No.
Okay. It just didn't sound right.
Yeah. I have no idea.
Okay. So one thing that can happen over time is, I mean, logical reasoning can become like the games in the sense that these answers aren't subjective. You're like, oh, this doesn't work for this reason.
Right.
And the ability to see that it is saying very important and a large number of people is something that if you become aware of it, it actually doesn't take that much effort. Like you're going through it and you're like, oh, well, that doesn't match up. I can see how it's kind of close to what they're talking about, but I don't know if those groups are large, right? If that's why you got rid of it, then you got rid of it for the right reason. Now we're just giving some, like, the logical explanation or underpinning of that rationale or why your gut was telling you that. So, yeah. Anyways, C. The more people whose health might be at risk from the regular use of a particular product, the more important it is for that product to be carefully tested to ensure its safety. That ties in, right, both in terms of the content and in terms of more and more, right? Because both of those things are true in the premises and in the conclusion, so that's a good answer. Answer choice D is wrong. If one type of medicine must be taken in more frequent doses than another, we never talked about dosage, right? You can just stop right there.
Yeah.
E, it is generally more important for a medicine than it is for a non-medical product to be carefully tested to ensure its safety. This is the opposite, right, of what we're saying. Even when you take into account the unless, if you do the unless if then translation, this starts out by saying if more people would be at risk from the non-medical product than from the, if more people would not be at risk from the non-medical product, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about more people being at risk from the medical product. You don't need to go through the time of converting it, but sometimes these unless answers can be tempting, the way they phrase them, right? Everything fits together and you're like, wow, is it C or E? That's when you'd want to bring in the translation, right? And see if it's actually going in the right direction, going from the premises to the conclusion or the other way. Okay, any questions on that one? We're good? Okay.